Hello everyone. We'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. So we're going to carry on reading the Heat Ring, War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells whilst we travel to Colonia. A few changes to how we're going to do this at this time. I'm going to take a few more breaks from reading as we go through to tell you a bit about what I'm doing, to do a bit of scanning, and basically to actually play the game. So we're currently at chapter 5, the heat rate, and let's just do a bit of scanning to get myself warmed up. So I'm just going to lower that down a bit. That's very loud to me. I don't know how that is for you guys. Okay, so if you've never explored on Elite before, the first thing you need is a discovery stick scanner, which does that, and that'll establish how many orbital bodies are in there. Then you press whichever button you've got bound to your FSS scanner, and what you do is you just tune yourself in to these frequencies down here, and you go looking. Now, if you want to fully scan, which is not what we're going to do today, because press the wrong button there. Actually, might as well. Let's do a full surface scan of something, shall we? So, what you do you should have a full surface scan as well, which allows you to drop probes. I've got mine bound to left trigger on my pad. You just fire the probes like this, and the idea is to get coverage. Now, I've accidentally inverted some of the controls on this, which is making life a little bit difficult.
Surface scan complete.
Whilst that scans, we may as well start reading, eh? After the glimpse I had of the Martians emerging from the cylinder, in which they had come to Earth from their planet, a kind of fascination paralyzed my actions. I remained standing, knee-deep in the heather, staring at the mound that hid them. It was a battleground of fear and curiosity. I did not dare go back towards the pit, but I felt passionate longing to peer into it. I began walking, therefore, in a big curve, seeking some point of vantage and continually looking at the sand heaps that hid these newcomers to our Earth. Once a leash of thin black wire, like the arms of an octopus, flashed across the sunset and was immediately withdrawn, and afterwards a thin rod rose up, joint by joint, bearing at its apex a circular disc that spun with a wobbling motion. What could be going on here? Most of the spectators had gathered in one or two groups. One, a little crowd towards Woking, and another knot of people in the direction to Coburn. Evidently, they shared my mental conflict. There were few near me. One man I approached. He was, I perceived, a neighbour of mine, though I did not know his name, and accosted. But it was scarcely time for articulate conversation. "What ugly brutes!" he said. "Good God, what ugly brutes!" He repeated this over and over again. "Did you see that man in the pit?" I asked, but he made no answer to that. We became silent and stood watching for a time side by side, deriving, I fancy, a certain comfort from one another's company. Then I shifted my position to a little knoll that gave me the advantage of a yard or more of elevation, and when I looked for him presently, he was walking back towards Woking. The sunset faded to twilight before anything further happened. The crowd far away on the left towards Woking seemed to grow, and I heard now a faint murmur from it. The little knot of people towards Coburn had dispersed. There was scarcely an intimation of movement from the pit. Just repositioning myself here a bit. Whoop. Then I saw some cabmen and others had walked boldly into the sandpits and heard the clatter of hoofs and the gride of wheels. I imagine that means grind. I saw a lad trundling off the barrow of apples. And then, within 30 yards of the pit, advancing from the direction of Horsell, I noticed a little black knot of men. The foremost of whom was waving a white flag. Oh. Where was I? Sorry about that. This was the deputation. There had been a hasty consultation, and since the Martians were evidently, in spite of their repulsive forms, intelligent creatures, it had been resolved to show them, by approaching them with signals, that we too were intelligent. Well, that's debatable, isn't it now? Right, let's just focus on the game for a little bit. Right, I need to adjust my settings here. This is driving me bonkers. Detailed surface. I think what happened was I got yaw and pitch mixed up. There we go. Right, so we haven't quite scanned the entirety of this planet. In fact, we've scanned barely any of it, so I'm just going to focus on that for a wee bit of time. So today's stream is brought to you by Taylor's Rum. Not a sponsor, but quite enjoyable all the same. Not rum, port. I never put myself as a fan of port, but it is quite delicious. Okay, whack a couple of meat these. Now, you do actually get a bonus for using a certain number. You can see it down the bottom right there, efficiency target. And that can range from almost anything. 21's the highest I've seen actually, but I'm sure there are, people who've seen higher. And they do react to gravity after a fashion at least. So there's actually an in-game reason why you can hear laser sounds and things, or at least I've been told there is, and that's the cockpit actually simulates the sounds, which I think is a nice bit of lore. I don't know how true it is though. Oh. So by approaching them with signals that we too were intelligent. Flutter, flutter went the flag. First to the right and then to the left. This sounds like a dance move. Dance instructions. It was too far for me to recognise anyone there, but afterwards I learned that Ogilvy, Stent, and Henderson were with the others in this attempt at communication. This little group had in its advance dragged inward, so to speak, the circumference of the now almost complete circle of people, and a number of dim black figures followed at discreet distance. Suddenly there was a flash of light, and a quantity of luminous greenish smoke came out of the pit in 3 distinct puffs which drove up, one after another, straight into the still air. The smoke, or flames perhaps would be a better word for it, was so bright that the deep blue sky overhead and the hazy stretches of brown common towards Shetsy set with black pine trees seemed to darken abruptly as these puffs arose, and to remain the darker after their dispersal. At the same time, a faint hissing sound became audible. Beyond the pit stood the little wedge of people with the white flag at its apex. Arrested by these phenomena, a little knot of small, vertical black shapes upon a black ground. As the green smoke arose, their faces flashed out pallid green and faded again as it vanished. Then, slowly, the hissing passed into a humming, and then a loud, long, droning noise. Slowly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out from it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each was suddenly, momentarily turned to fire. Then, by the light of their own destruction, I saw them staggering and falling, and their supporters turning to run. I stood staring, not as yet realizing that this was death leaping from man to man in that little distant crowd. All I felt was that it was something very strange, an almost noiseless and blinding flash of light, and a man fell headlong and lay still. And as the unseen shafts of heat passed over them, pine trees burst into fire, and every dry furze bush became with one dull thud a mass of flames. And, far away, towards Knapp Hill, I saw the flashes of trees and hedges, and wooden buildings suddenly set alight. Hi there, Kaylee, you okay? So I've done a bit of scanning. We've still got... Oh, what the heck is void opal? I haven't got any methods of mining at the moment, so we can't get that, I'm afraid. But what we will do is we will jump to our next target. Bear with me 1 second, guys. So, you missed the first one. It is available on YouTube, and I'll be uploading this to YouTube as well. I'll be uploading all of these videos unedited because I am a lazy bugger. Okay. Oh, what class star is this? Because we could do with a bit of fuel, I think. I swear it used to tell you what class of star it was. Okay, cool. We can get fuel from this. So, again, people who've never played it, I'm sure anyone watching this has played this game, but people who haven't can actually scoop fuel from stars, provided you've got a fuel scoop to do so. Pardon me. We've already done that, haven't we? So we're going to do our little scanning again.
Warning, temperature
Ooh,
critical.
critical temperature. So when that happens, we point ourselves away and accelerate. I did tweet that. Well, I don't know if I tweeted. I did pop it on Facebook, but it's okay. It's not as if anyone follows me on Twitter.
Warning, temperature
Oh, temperature's still critical, eh? Oh, thank you, Kaylee. Okay. Are we safe to park here for a bit? Yeah, we are. Let's carry on with the story, shall we? It was sweeping round, swiftly and steadily, this flaming death, this invisible, inevitable sword of heat. I perceived it coming towards me by the flashing of bushes it touched, and was too astounded and stupefied to stir. I heard the crackle of fire in the sandpits, and suddenly the squeal of a horse that was suddenly stilled. Then it was as if an invisible yet intensely heated finger were drawn through the heather between me and the Martians, and all along a curving line beyond the sandpits, dark ground smoked and crackled. Just in case anyone's wondering, Kaylee, who's in the chat, is my partner, and
fuel scooping complete.
we went out the other day and we passed her on a lucky potato. So anyway, back to where I was. All this happened with such a swiftness that I had stood motionless, dumbfounded and dazzled by the flashes of light. Had that death swept through a full circle, it must inevitably have slain me in my surprise. But it passed and spared me, and left the night about me suddenly dark and unfamiliar. Undulating common seemed now dark almost to blackness, except where its roadways lay grey, pale under the deep blue sky of the early night. It was dark, and suddenly void of men. Overhead the stars were mustering, and in the west the sky was still pale and bright, almost greenish blue. Sorry, gotta do my scanning. So, scanning just gets you, in this case it helps with getting a bit of cash when you hand in all your exploration data to someone. Oh, that's a pretty planet, shall we go visit it? Let's have a look. Oh, they're all quite pretty planets. Let's have a gander at this one. Where was I? Greenish blue. The tops of the pine trees and the roofs of horse came out sharp and black against the western afterglow. The Martians and their appliances were altogether invisible, save for that thin mast on which their restless mirror wobbled. Patches of bush and isolated trees here and there smoked and glowed still, and the houses towards Woking Station were sending up spires of flame into the stillness of the air. Nothing was changed save for that, and a terrible astonishment. The little group of black specks with the flag of white had been swept out of existence, and the stillness of the evening, though it seemed to me, had scarcely been broken. It came to me that I was upon this dark common, helpless, unprotected and alone. Suddenly, a thing falling upon me came from without. Falling upon me from without came fear. And with effort I turned and began a stumbling run through the heather. The fear I felt was no rational fear, but a panic terror not only of the Martians, but of the dusk and the stillness all about me. Sorry about this, just such an extraordinary effect in unmanning me that it had that I ran weeping silently as a child might do. Once I had turned, I did not dare to look back. So that's quite interesting to me. So in the Victorian era, being stoic was important to being manly. So Wells writing about how he was so scared that he was weeping quietly, or at least that the character was, is quite significant. At the time, that would have been quite shocking. Bear with me 1 second whilst I just grab a quick drink. I remember I felt an extraordinary persuasion that I was being played with, that presently, when I was upon the very verge of safety, this mysterious death, as swift as the passage of light, would leap after me from the pit about the cylinder and strike me down. So, another interesting thing to mention is that, as far as I'm aware, lasers hadn't been invented at this time. So, this heat ray was, is a pretty good description of what we'd view as a laser. Look at that. What a nice looking planet. Okay. Back to it then. Chapter 6. The heat ray in the Coburn Road. It is still a matter of wonder how the Martians are able to slay men so swiftly and so silently. Many think that in some way they are able to generate intense heat in a chamber of practically absolute non-conductivity. This intense heat they project in a parallel beam against any object they choose, by means of a polished parabolic mirror of unknown composition. Much as the parabolic mirror of a lighthouse projects a beam of light. But no one has absolutely proven these details. However it is done, it is certain that a beam of heat is the essence of the matter. Heat and invisible instead of visible light. Whatever is combustible flashes to flames as it touches, Lead runs like water. It softens iron, cracks and melts glass, and when it falls upon water, incontinently that explodes into steam. That night, nearly 40 people lay under the starlight about the pit, charred and distorted beyond recognition. And all night long, the common from Hall to Maybury was deserted and brightly ablaze. The news of the massacre probably reached Cobham, Woking, and Ottershaw about the same time. In Woking, the shops had closed when the tragedy happened, and another number of people, shop people and so forth, attracted by the stories they had heard, were walking over the Horsell Bridge and along the road between the hedges that runs out at last upon the common. Oh, I may as well jump out of this place already, sorry. You may imagine the young people brushed up after the labours of the day, and making this novelty, as they would make any novelty, the excuse for walking together and enjoying a trivial flirtation. You may figure to yourself the hum of voices along the road in the gloaming. As yet, of course, few people in Woking even knew about that the cylinder had opened, though poor Henderson had sent a messenger on a bicycle to the post office with a special wire for the evening paper. Oh.
Friendship drive charging.
The Friendship Drive charging. As these folk came out by twos and threes upon the open, they found little knots of people talking excitedly and peering at the spinning mirror over the sandpits, and the newcomers were, no doubt, soon infected by the excitement of the occasion. By 8:30, when the deputation was destroyed, there may have been a crowd of 300 people or more at this place, besides those who had left the road to approach the Martians nearer. There were 3 policemen too, one of whom was mounted, doing their best under instructions from Stent to keep the people back and deter them from approaching the cylinder. There was some booing from those more thoughtless and excitable souls, for whom a crowd is always the occasion for noise and horseplay. Absolutely no different from nowadays. Stent and Ogilvy anticipated some possibilities of a collision and telegraphed from Horsell to the barracks as soon as the Martians emerged. The help of a company of soldiers to protect these strange creatures from violence. After that, they returned to lead that ill-fated advance. The description of their death, as it was seen by the crowd, tallies very closely with my own impressions. 3 puffs of green smoke, the deep humming note, and the flashes of flame. I'm just going to do a wee bit of scanning here. It looks like someone else has joined us. Hi, welcome. If you want me to explore the things a bit more rather than just reading and scanning, feel free to shout up in chat. Last stream I was very hot after reading, so I'm using these opportunities to take a little break. Also, if you have any questions as well, feel free to shout up and let me know.
Fuel scooping complete.
Okay, so it didn't look like there were any particularly interesting planets there, so I'm just going to boost on to the next system. A little bit apart. But the crowd of people had a far narrower escape than mine. Only the fact that a hummock of start that again. Only the fact that a hummock of heathery sand intercepted the lower part of the heat ray saved them. Had the elevation of the parabolic mirror been a few yards higher, none could have lived to tell the tale. They saw the flashes and the men falling, and an invisible hand, as it were, lit the bushes as it hurried towards them through the twilight. Then, with a whistling note that rose above the droning of the pit, the beam swung close to their heads, lighting the tops of beech trees that lined the road and splitting the bricks, smashing the windows, firing the window frames, and bringing down, in a crumbling ruin, a portion of the gable of the house nearest the corner. In the sudden thud, hiss, and glare of the igniting trees, the panic-stricken crowd seems to have swayed hesitatingly for some moment. Sparks and burning twigs began to fall in the road, and single leaves like puffs of flame. Hats and dresses caught fire, and then came a crying from the common. There were shrieks and shouts, and suddenly a mounted policeman came galloping through the confusion, with his hands clasped over his head, screaming. "They're coming!" a woman shrieked. Incontinently, everyone was turning and pushing at those behind, in order to clear their way to Woking again. They must have bolted as blindly as a flock of sheep.
Fuel scooping.
Where the road grows narrow and black between the high banks, the crowd jammed, and a desperate struggle occurred. All that crowd did not escape. 3 persons at least, 2 women and a little boy, were crushed and trampled there, left to die amid the terror and the darkness. Oh, it's getting a bit heavy, isn't it? I wonder how professional voice artists do this, because it's a bit tiring. I suppose they're not trying to play a video game at the same time.
System scan complete.
Let's have a look what we've got. Oh, it'll just be suns. Anything exciting with them? No, not really. Let's have a look at our current location. We're currently heading here, with our aim to head to Colonia, which is over here somewhere. And then from Colonia, we're probably going to head to Sag A. And then we'll eventually head back towards the bubble. During these journeys, I'll, just read different books. I hope you enjoy the idea. It's mainly to practice, reading out loud, which I get very nervous about. Obviously, if you've got any suggestions for how to run the stream, or any suggestions for books to read, as long as they're open, public domain, happy to read them. The copy of this was provided by the Gutenberg Project, which I recommend looking up. They have a vast library of open source books for download, but free download as well. So we're just going to jump into this next thing, and then I'll start on chapter 7. This looks like a fun system. Chapter 7. How I reached home.
System scan complete.
For my own part, I remember nothing of my flight except the stress of blundering against trees and stumbling through all the heather. Nothing interesting here, eh? That's cool then. At last, I could go no further. I was exhausted with the violence of my emotion and of my flight. I skipped a bit. I do apologise. I'll start that again. For my own part, I remember nothing of my flight, except the stress of blundering against trees and stumbling through the heather. All about me gathered the invisible terrors of the Martians. That pitiless sword of heat seemed whirling to and fro, flourishing overhead before it descended and smote me out of life. I came into the road between the crossroads and a horsehole, ran along this to the crossroads. At last I could go no further. I was exhausted with the violence of my emotions and of my flight, and I staggered and fell by the wayside. That was near the bridge that crosses the canal by the gasworks. I fell and lay still.
Ready to engage.
I must have remained there for some time. I sat up, strangely perplexed. For a moment, perhaps, I could not clearly understand how I came there. My terror had fallen from me like a garment. My hat had gone. We said last time how important hats were to the Victorians. Very important. If you were seen without a hat, it was quite scandalous. And my collar had burst away from its fastener. A few minutes before, there'd been only 3 real things for me: the immensity of the night, and space, and nature, my own feebleness and anguish, and the near approach of death. Now it was as if something turned over, and the point of view had altered abruptly. There was no sensible transition from one state of mind to another. It was immediately the self of every day again, a decent, ordinary citizen. The silent common, the impulse of my flight, the starting flames, were as if they had been in a dream. And I asked myself, had these latter things indeed happened? I could not credit it.
Frameshift drive charging.
I rose and walked unsteadily up the steep incline of the bridge. My mind was blank wonder. My muscles and nerves seemed drained of their strength. I dare say I staggered drunkenly. A head rose over the arch, and the figure of a workman carrying a basket appeared. Beside him ran a little boy. He passed me, wishing me a good night. I was minded to speak with it to him, but it did not. I answered his greeting with a meaningless mumble and went over the bridge. Over the Maybury Arch, a train, a billowing tumult of white, violet smoke, and a long caterpillar of lighted windows went flying south. Clatter, clatter, clap, rap, and it had gone. A dim group of people talked in the gate of one of the houses, in the pretty little row of gables that was called Oriental Terrace. It was all so real and familiar. And that behind me was frantic, fantastic. Such things, I told myself, could not be. Are we on just a system of suns again? Let's have a look. Oh, all different suns though. Let's see how far away they are. Oh, these two look like they could be right close together. Let's visit them. Oh, just... Oh, that looks like it's going to be immense.
Fuel scoop disengaged.
So I'm going to take a break after I get to these 2 stars quickly. I hope you're enjoying things so far. Perhaps I'm a man of, and I'll get back to it whilst we travel here. Perhaps I'm a man of exceptional moods. I do not know how far my experience is common. At times I suffer from the strangest sense of detachment from myself and the world about me. I seem to watch all of it from the outside, from somewhere inconceivably remote, out of time, out of space, out of the stress and tragedy of it all. This feeling was very strong upon me that night. Here was another side to my dream. But the trouble was the blank incongruity, the sudden serenity and swift death flying yonder, not 2 miles away. There was a noise of business from the gasworks, and the electric lamps were all alight. I stopped at the group of people. "What news from the common?" said I. There were 2 men and a woman standing there. "Huh?" said one of the men, turning. "I said, what news from the common?" "Ain't you just been there?" asked the man. "People seem fair silly about the common." I didn't realise that was meant to be a woman. I do apologise. Over the gate. "What's it all about?" "Haven't you heard from the men from Mars?" said I. "The creatures from Mars?" "Right enough," said the woman over the gate. "Thanks." And all 3 of them laughed. I felt foolish and angry. I tried and found I could not tell them what I had seen. They laughed, again at my broken sentences. "You'll hear more yet," I said, and went to my home. I startled my wife at the doorway, so haggard was I. I went to the dining room, sat down, drank some wine, and as soon as I could collect myself sufficiently, I told her all the things I had seen. The dinner, which was a cold one, had already been served, and remained neglected on the table whilst I told my story. Hey, this seems like a really good place to take a break. Let me just approach these stars. Look at that. Kaylee's just sat right next to me. Says hello. And look at these stars. Like Christmas. Right. I'll see you all in about 5 or 10 minutes. Cool. And we're back. Sorry about that. Where are we? We've got 64 jumps till we get to our location, but we're not going to be going for that long today. I'm going to wrap up the stream after this chapter. So, just to recap, he just met a few people. They thought he was in hysterics and basically thought he was talking shite. Okay, and he just got to his wife. I'd startled my wife at the doorway, so haggard was I. I went into the dining room, sat down, drank some wine. It's to drinking wine. And as soon as I could collect myself sufficiently, and told her the things I had seen. The dinner, which was a cold one, had already been served, and remained neglected on the table while I told my story. There is one thing, I said, to allay the fears I had aroused. They are the most sluggish things I ever saw crawl. They may keep the pit and kill people who come near them, but they cannot get out of it. But the horror of them. Don't, dear, said my wife, knitting her brows and putting her hand on mine. Poor Ogilvy, I said. To think he may be lying dead there. My wife, at least, did not find my experience incredible. When I told her how deadly white her face was, I ceased abruptly. They may come here, she said again and again. I pressed her to take wine and tried to reassure her. Let's get scooping some fuel, shall we? They can scarcely move, I said. I began to comfort her and myself, repeating all that Ogilvy had told me of the impossibility of the Martians establishing themselves on Earth. In particular, I laid stress on the gravitational difficulty. On the surface of the Earth, the force of gravity is 3 times what it is on the surface of Mars. A Martian, therefore, would weigh 3 times more than on Mars. Albeit his muscular strength would be the same. His own body would be a cope of lead to him. I'm not sure what a cope is. I think it's... we'll look it up later. Therefore, that indeed was the general opinion. Both the Times and the Daily Telegraph, for instance, insisted on the next morning, and both overlooked, just as I did, 2 obvious modifying influences. Okay, we're just going to do a little bit of scanning. Helps if I press the button right, doesn't it? Do-do-do-do-do. I don't see anything particularly exciting to look at the moment, so let's just boost on out of here, shall we? And we're still getting a bit of fuel, so we'll... Anything pretty to look at? Stars, maybe? The atmosphere of the Earth, we now know, contains more oxygen, or far less argon, whichever way one likes to put it, than does Mars's. The invigorating influences of this excess of oxygen upon the Martians indisputably did more to counterbalance the increased weight of their bodies. And, in the second place, we all overlooked that such mechanical intelligences as the Martians possessed were quite able to dispense with muscular exertions in a pinch. But I did not consider these points at a time, and so my reasoning was dead against the chances of invaders. With wine and food, the confidence of my own table, and the necessity of reassuring my wife, I grew by insensible degrees courageous and secure. They have done a foolish thing, I said, fingering my wine glass. They are dangerous because, no doubt, they are mad with terror. Perhaps they expected to find no living things. Certainly no intelligent living things. A shell in the pit, said I. If worst comes to worst, we'll kill them all. The intense excitement of events had, no doubt, left my perceptive powers in a state of erethism. I don't know what that means either. Let's have a look. Dictionary. Well, I thought I'd already downloaded the dictionary, but apparently not. Okay, so excessive sensitivity or rapid reaction to stimulation. Okay. I remember that dinner table with extraordinary vividness even now. My dear White's sweet, anxious face peering at me from under the pink lampshade, with white clothes, the white clothes with its silver and white cloth with its silver and glass table furniture. For in those days, even philosophical writers had many little luxuries. Crimson purple in my wine glass, are photographically distinct. At the end of it, I sat, tempering nuts with a cigarette, regretting Ogilvy's rashness and announcing the short-sighted timidity of the Martian. Some respectable dodo in the Mauritius might have lauded it in his nest, and discussed the arrival of a shipful of pitiless sailors in want of animal food. We will peck them to death tomorrow, my dear. I did not know it, but that was the last civilized dinner I was to eat for very many strange and terrible days. And we're on chapter 8, and I'm going to call it and leave it there, folks. Thank you very much for coming. I will be doing this every week. Yeah, check out my friends Incompetent Heroes and my partner streams, XO Kaylee XO. Good night, and yeah, talk to you soon.